everybody, I'm Shutter Brother Kevin Lane, and it's time for Uncle Jonesy's Camera of the Week for Sunday, May the 3rd, 2020. And today we are looking at the Canon Canonet 28. Now this is a little rangefinder camera, and it is the less expensive and less featured cousin to the Canon Canonet QL17, which is a camera that Kelly has, and perhaps he'll talk about that one someday. And when I say less expensive and less featured, it's mainly because the QL17 had an automatic setting, but it also had full manual control. This camera has automatic setting only. Although it has very limited manual control, it was meant to be used pretty much automatic all the time. It was meant to be a kind of camera that you would put film in and that you would simply focus with a rangefinder and then shoot in all the outdoor situations that you would face. And you could even do the same thing with flash. So let's talk about the camera, why I think it's a pretty cool camera, and why you might consider looking for one if you don't have one or have a camera like it. This camera came out in 1971 and they stopped making it in 1976. It is a fixed lens. You can't change the lens on it, and it's a 40mm f2.8 lens. It's a pretty sharp lens from my experience as well. Now, as I said, it's a 35mm film camera, and you can use 35mm film from the ISO speed 25 all the way up to 400. And as I also said, it's meant to be used in auto exposure mode all the time. It has a light cell right here, and it's a CDS cell powered by a battery. We'll talk about that in a minute. And when you put the ring here, the aperture ring, in the automatic setting, then that cell reads the light, sets the aperture and the exposure. I guess we would call that a program setting today. So it's a program exposure camera, and it ranges from about 1/30th of a second and f2.8 all the way up to 1/620th of a second at f14.5. And it tries to put it somewhere in the middle to take advantage of the best qualities of the lens and give you the best depth of field as well. But whatever it's doing, you don't think about that. You just focus and shoot. Now, when you look to the viewfinder, it does have a needle, and the needle shows all the different shutter speeds that it can do, and it points to the shutter speed it has chosen. But you don't know what the aperture is, and there's nothing you can do to affect the speed of the shutter. There is one control that you can have on this camera if you decided you wanted to underexpose or overexpose by a stop or two. You can, on the side of the lens here, actually change the ISO setting. You can go one stop over or one stop under by changing to a different ISO if you wanted to do something special on that particular shot. That's pretty much the only control you have with this camera. All right, so what about if you're not using it in manual or automatic mode? Because as you can see here, it does have all of the different aperture settings. Well, what happens is when you take it off of manual, or off of automatic, I should say, it takes the shutter speed and puts it at 1/30th of a second. So you could, in theory, put a film in here of a certain speed and do the calculations, like for example, if it had 100 speed film, you could put the, on a bright sunny day, if you're shooting sunny 16, you could set it to f8 at 1/30th of a second, and you could shoot in bright sunlight. And then if it's got a hazy light or even less light, you could adjust by opening up the shutter speed. But it's really meant to be used as just a not think about exposure kind of camera, which is a kind of camera that I think all film photographers should have in their arsenal that they can just pull out for family events and things like that. The viewfinder is very bright, and the rangefinder patch is also very easy to see. It has a very smooth focusing lens here, like that, and it's actually a fun camera to use. It's very easy on the hands and holding it, and the shutter is pretty quiet as well. Now let's see here, let's take it off. There we go. All right, pretty cool. Nice, small, fits the hands well. Now, it does use a battery, and that's where this camera has a little bit of a problem, because it's an older camera that uses that mercury type battery, mercury oxide battery. It uses a PX625, and those batteries are no longer available. So what are your choices with this camera? As I said, you could use it without a battery and just work with that 1/30th of a second shutter speed, but that's not going to be very effective for you, and there's a lot of other cameras that would be better for that than this one. So you'll want to find one, if you're looking for one, you'll want to find one that first of all works with the meter, and you're going to want to put a battery in there. But what are you going to put in? Well, you could put a modern alkaline or silver oxide cell in there. But if you do, you're going to put a battery in that has a slightly different voltage. This camera was meant to take a battery that had a voltage of 1.35. But now modern batteries are at 1.5, a little bit higher voltage, which means that the exposures could be slightly off. Now, some people say film latitude is so great today that it's not a big deal. Just go ahead and shoot that way with it. But if you're kind of a stickler about that sort of thing, there are a couple of workarounds. Now, there are hearing aid batteries out there. I think they call them wine cells, W-E-I-N, and they can be used in this camera, and they produce the right voltage, 1.35 or something very, very close to that. The problem with those cells is that once you take the little seal off of them, they don't last very long, and so you're constantly having to change those. Another thing you can do is to get an adapter, and I have an adapter here, and I'm going to put the camera down so I can show you. This is called an MR9 adapter, and it's just a piece of metal that has a chip in it that what you do is, in this little cavity right here, you put a modern silver oxide cell, and I think I have the 386 cell here, or an alkaline cell. Silver oxide has a more continuous life than alkaline. Anyway, you put it in there, and it becomes the same shape as the old mercury cell. And then you would put this in the battery chamber of the camera, and it reduces the voltage down to 1.35 and gives you an accurate meter reading. So that's an option. Now, let me say one more thing about this. I bought, since I have several of these kind of mercury battery cameras, I bought this to use in them. I thought, let's go ahead and make the investment. And I noticed then that they are going for about between $30, $40. But it's a one-time investment, and you never have to worry about it after that. And these silver oxide cells are easy to get. They're plentiful. But be careful. If you go on like certain auction sites, you may see these for a lot less. And I'm not entirely convinced that they do everything that this one does. They could be fake. So be careful about that. Buy these MR9 adapters from a reputable dealer. All right? Now, let's talk about flash with this camera for just a moment. It does have a hot shoe, and so you can mount a flash on it. And if you happen to find or have the Canon Canonet D flash, you're in luck, because when you put that flash on there, it syncs with the exposure system and gives you an automatic exposure on the flash. But if you can't find that flash, you don't have one, and you choose not to look for one, but you have another flash like this Vivitar Auto 252, which is kind of my go-to flash for my old manual cameras, then you can put that on the hot shoe and you can use it. The thing is, you'll want to turn the aperture to the suggested aperture setting that your flash gives you. And then the only negative about using the flash with that kind of flash for this camera is that it's going to use that 1/30th of a second shutter speed, which I haven't found to be too big a problem, but it works really well. So for example, if you go with a higher setting on this one and your whatever speed film you're using asks you to use f4, then you would simply move the aperture dial to f4 and then focus and shoot just like you would normally. Okay, so flash works just fine, but the intended flash was the Canonet D flash. Now, I've looked out there and found that this camera is quite available, and I got this one at an antique store for about $18. If you go online you're going to get a range, about an average, I should say, of somewhere between $25 and $30. It's going to be a little bit more if the seller says tested, all right, and it's going to be less if the seller doesn't know whether it works or not. As I said, there's no real purpose in having this camera unless it's working. It's a working meter camera, all right, because that automatic setting is why it was made in the first place. So try to get one that's got a working meter. Now the flash can be had for anywhere between $10 and $30. It really ranges out there, but once again, look for one that's working. All right, so the Canon Canonet 28, a nice little point and shoot rangefinder camera with automatic exposure, and pick it up, shoot it, and not worry about, just shoot away with it. So if you enjoy this show on old cameras that we bring you each week, you might enjoy our podcast, and that is found, it's called Uncle Jonesy's Cameras, and you can find it on any of your favorite podcast sites. We also have a blog, and that blog is, the address for that blog is unclejonesyscameras.blogspot.com. And Jonesy's is spelled Joneysys. We take out the apostrophe. unclejonesyscameras.blogspot.com. You can find us at on Facebook and Instagram at UJC Podcast, on both of those. And we'd love to hear from you. You can drop us a line at unclejonesyscameras@gmail.com, or just comment on our Facebook page and we'll get back to you. Or you can comment here on YouTube if you like. And we would really love it if you would subscribe so that you won't miss any of our videos. All right, well, we'll be back with another video next week on another camera. Until then, the sun is shining. Go out there and enjoy the spring weather. Put some film in your camera. Go out there and capture those moments. And I'll see you next time. Happy shooting, everybody.